The fans' attitude towards Real Madrid varies. Some adore the Whites for their triumphs and trophies, others hate them for their arrogance and haughtiness. But no opinion changes the obvious: the Royal Club is one of the most successful in football history. Throughout the history of the Champions Cup and League, the Whites, with their 13 trophies, are unparalleled. Some might say that nearly half of these titles were won in ancient times when football was more like rugby than the game we know today. However, in the 21st century, no other team has performed as successfully in the European arena as the Madrid Giants.
In today's video, we'll talk about how, after a difficult period in the 90s, Los Blancos emerged from the shadow of Barcelona
and had several glorious periods, enhancing their historical greatness with a plethora of legendary players and truly iconic achievements. In the first half of the 90s, Real Madrid fans had a tough time. The Whites were forced to watch helplessly as their main enemy, Barcelona, dominated Spanish football for 4 years. Barcelona's victory in the Champions Cup was particularly painful for Madrid, as Real had not won the main European tournament in nearly 3 decades at that point. Real Madrid only managed to break Barcelona's hegemony in the Spanish Championship in the 94-95 season, using a clever tactic that they would repeat in the future. Before the new campaign, the Royal Club made 2 successful deals. While the arrival of skilled midfielder Fernando Redondo was simply a quality reinforcement, Michael Laudrup's transfer from Barcelona to Real Madrid caused a storm of emotions, largely symbolic and somewhat mystical. Shortly before this controversial transfer, Barcelona had thrashed Real Madrid 5-0. A year later, the Whites took their revenge with a similar score, and Laudrup was on the field again, this time for Madrid. After their long-awaited championship, Real Madrid experienced a disappointing fall to 6th place, followed by another championship win in the 96-97 season under Fabio Capello. Despite his defensive style, the Italian managed to integrate bright attacking personalities like Predrag Mijatovic, Davor Suker, Clarence Seedorf, and Roberto Carlos into the team. However, due to a dispute with club president Lorenzo Sanz, Capello only lasted a year in Madrid. The title didn't stay long either, and for the rest of the decade, Real Madrid didn't win the Spanish championship again. Jupp Heynckes, who led Real Madrid in the 97-98 season, ended up in 4th place. The German coach openly clashed with the players, to the extent that he insulted them in a conversation with the club president and stated that he couldn't win anything with these ragamuffins. Surprisingly, despite such a toxic atmosphere, it was Heynckes who once again led Real Madrid to the top of European football after 32 years of agonizing waiting. The long-awaited triumph of Madrid occurred, so to speak, in spite of everything, and was somewhat accidental. Mijatovic's offside goal colorfully illustrated the illogicality of the situation.
The cherished trophy was a huge joy for the fans, but it didn't change Heynckes' mind. The German specialist, as planned, left the club at the end of the season. His successors didn't last long either. Sanz craved a championship, but neither Gus Hiddink nor John Toshak could compete with Barcelona in the 98-99 season. Therefore, at the beginning of the new campaign, Real Madrid was again under new management. Vicente del Bosque took over. Unlike his famous predecessors, who sometimes tried too hard to impose their views on the team, the Spaniard approached the job very diplomatically. Being a calm and composed person, he developed the same qualities in his charges and sought to find a balance in the team's play. In the Spanish championship, Del Bosque was not particularly successful. Real Madrid only finished 5th, but the question of his dismissal became irrelevant after a parallel triumph in the Champions League. In the final, Real Madrid convincingly beat Valencia 3-0.
The year 2000 was significant for Real Madrid not only because of their success in the main European Cup that same summer. Florentino Perez was elected president of the Royal Club, largely due to his promise to eliminate a debt of €270 million and lure Luis Figo, a Barcelona legend, to Santiago Bernabéu. Initially, such a transfer seemed absurd, but the new president kept his word, and the Portuguese, amid protests from Barcelona fans, moved to Madrid. Figo was immediately anathematized at Camp Nou, while Real Madrid fans rejoiced. They had struck a blow below the belt to their hated Catalan rivals. Real Madrid immediately won the championship title, but Figo's resonant transfer had not only a football component. It marked a new era for the capital's giants, the era of the Galácticos.
Perez's idea was simple: the Royal Club's colors should be defended by Royal players. This flattered the fans, but not all the president's decisions were approved. For example, fans were very upset by the sale of Redondo to Milan in the summer of 2000. During the election campaign, Fernando openly supported Sanz, so Perez decided to teach him a lesson, although the Argentine was considered one of the strongest players of the Whites. Real Madrid lost a key player in midfield, but Florentino didn't care. The club boss was attracted to attacking stars, who, in his opinion, could win without Del Bosque. By the way, because of this belief, he did not change the coach, leaving Vicente at the helm of the Whites. In the summer of 2001, Perez made a splash in the football world with another elite newcomer. Zinedine Zidane became a player of the Blancos, and his transfer for €76 million was a record for football. 2 decades later, Zidane's move to Madrid is recognized as an epoch-making event that changed the history of the Royal Club. But then, in 2001, no one thought about what kind of coach Zinedine would become, and there was no time to fantasize. On the football field, the Frenchman did magical things, like the goal against Bayer, which brought Real Madrid another victory in the Champions League and, at the same time, reinforced Florentino's belief in the infallibility of his utopian plan called Galácticos. Following the previously chosen course, in the summer of 2002, Perez paid €45 million for Ronaldo, another Ballon d'Or winner and the best player of the recently concluded World Cup. No one argued that the phenomenon was a terrific striker, that was pure truth. But there was no acute need for his acquisition. On the contrary, the trio of Raúl, Guti, and Fernando Morientes in the attacking line looked brilliant. But with the arrival of the Brazilian, their duo disintegrated. Ronaldo proved his coolness in practice. His 23 goals in La Liga significantly helped the Whites win the championship title, but even the phenomenon did not help in the Champions League. In the semi-finals, the Blancos lost to Juventus, which greatly upset Florentino. The president firmly believed that Real Madrid should invariably win all tournaments in which they participate, so he began to look for the guilty and found them, clearly not in the right place. 3 important figures were affected: Del Bosque, whom Perez openly called a bad coach, defender and captain Fernando Hierro, who was literally thrown out of the club, and hardworking Claude Makelele, who asked for a salary increase. "We won't miss him. He can't play with his head and rarely passes more than 3 meters, Florentino said, dismissing Claude. But in fact, the Frenchman was a key player in the team, the only one who created a precious balance between defense and attack. Finding a replacement for Makelele seemed like a priority task for Perez, but he didn't think so. Instead, the president made another megatransfer. David Beckham arrived at Santiago Bernabéu, snatched from none other than Barcelona. In terms of marketing, buying the extravagant Englishman looked like a brilliant move. Just think of the profit from the Asian region, which was just crazy about David. But from a gaming point of view, the Whites did not need Beckham at all. Florentino continued to justify his loud transfer steps with the infamous concept of Zidanes and Pavones. For him, the ideal Real Madrid was a combination of superstars and local graduates, but in reality, there was a clear bias toward stars, leading to imbalance and chaos. Unwittingly, Perez passed the point of no return, and the Blancos began to stagnate. Over 3 years, the Galácticos did not win a single trophy, and 5 coaches visited Real Madrid's bench, but none of them matched the level or ambitions of the team. Florentino was still convinced that the name and merits of the coach did not matter. He still thought that star players would win by themselves, but, of course, he was greatly mistaken. Whether Perez reconsidered his strategy in time, Real Madrid might have avoided an unimpressive stretch, especially in the Champions League, where such a star-studded team could not reach the final. In the absence of sporting results, the board of directors began to put pressure on the president, forcing him to leave. This slightly tarnished Perez's reputation, but his activities clearly had positive aspects, the most important of which was a noticeable improvement in the club's financial situation. When Florentino took office, he promised to get rid of a huge debt of almost 300 million euros, and in this context, he succeeded. So he left with a clear conscience. This happened at the end of February 2006, and by the summer, Ramon Calderón had been elected as the new president of the Royal Club, who tried to correct his predecessor's staffing mistakes. He bulk-bought defensive midfielders, hoping to find a new Makelele, and also appointed a victorious coach with a very serious reputation. The second coming of Capello to Santiago Bernabéu was as successful as the first. By putting together a decent team from the remnants of the Galácticos and a whole party of newcomers, Don Fabio returned the Spanish crown to Madrid and then made Real Madrid fans feel a sense of déjà vu when he left the club again after winning the championship race. Riding the wave of success, Calderón decided to actively work in the transfer market again, giving special preference to the Dutch. For example, players like Arjen Robben, Wesley Sneijder, and Royston Drenthe became Blancos. But the capital team managed to defend the title not because of this. Bernd Schuster, who replaced Capello in the coaching chair, managed to win La Liga largely due to a crisis in the ranks of Barcelona and the weakness of other teams. Neither Villarreal nor Sevilla or Atletico were ready for a battle for gold. In the summer of 2008, the Dutch expansion continued at Real Madrid. Rafael van der Vaart and Klaas-Jan Huntelaar arrived at Santiago Bernabéu, but this time there was not enough worthy reinforcement. Thanks to Josep Guardiola, Barcelona firmly regained the championship title, meanwhile mocking the Blancos in one of the subsequent meetings. The resurgent Catalans posed a serious threat to the Madrid giant. Therefore, Perez, who became president of the club for the second time in June 2009, began to assemble new Galácticos, continuing to follow the course he had chosen at the beginning of the century. At the same time, an important point was that the boss of Real Madrid wanted to completely erase Calderón's period of activity, actively firing the employees he hired and selling players who came during his absence. In that transfer window, Madrid's expenses exceeded 250 million euros, but the reinforcement was indeed cosmic. The new attacking stars of the Whites were Cristiano Ronaldo, Kaká, and Karim Benzema. Buying the Portuguese was a big achievement for Florentino, as he got an excellent striker and the most media football player on the planet in one bottle. But in this situation, there was a spoonful of tar. Perez had to sacrifice a club legend and fan favorite. To further capitalize on the Ronaldo CR7 brand, a year after his return, Perez finally got rid of Raúl, who had worn the shirt with the 7th number for many years. Such steps once again led the public to criticize Florentino for his eternal pursuit of stars, but this time he slightly changed his approach. Thus, in the summer of 2009, along with creative diamonds, Xabi Alonso, Raúl Albiol, and Álvaro Arbeloa, who performed a large amount of defensive work, moved to Real Madrid. A year later, the team was replenished with young and promising Ángel Di María, Mesut Ozil, and Sami Khedira. All this indicated that the president had somewhat revised his staffing strategy. Moreover, before the start of the new 10-11 season, Perez corrected another mistake. Instead of Manuel Pellegrini, who, by the way, put up a rare decent resistance to the fantastic Barcelona, José Mourinho was appointed. The Portuguese arrived in Madrid immediately after the historic treble at Inter, at the height of his fame. This was the case when the coach was considered one of the Galácticos. Upon arrival in the Spanish capital, José immediately entered into a fierce battle with Barcelona and personally with Guardiola, but it was not so easy to defeat the Catalan monster. In the championship, Real Madrid fought very decently but still finished 4 points behind Barca. The Blancos could have been left without trophies, which would have been a serious failure, but Mourinho avoided this by winning the Spanish Cup final. The Whites still beat Barcelona thanks to Ronaldo's extra-time goal. The more difficult the task, the more José tried, and in the 11-12 season, he did something fantastic. To overtake the Blaugranas, it was necessary to jump over the head, and that is exactly what the Madrid players did. They scored 100 points in La Liga, won 32 victories, and scored 121 goals. All these indicators were record-breaking, but that was the only way to overtake the Catalan machine. It would seem that the new 12-13 campaign could be a continuation of the feast performed by Mourinho's team, especially since Guardiola left Barcelona. But instead of consolidating efforts at Real Madrid, a civil war broke out between José and one of the club's acting legends. The Portuguese believed that in the confrontation with the Blaugranas, all means were good. He behaved provocatively, provoked, and sometimes even crossed the line, as in the situation with Tito Villanova. But at some point, Iker Casillas decided that there should be a truce with the El Clásico opponent and concluded it by talking to the Catalan leaders. In Mourinho's eyes, Casillas's act looked like weakness and betrayal, so he benched him, and the entire collective, for the most part, split into two camps. As a result, Real Madrid not only lost in the championship race but generally remained without trophies, except for the Super Cup, which no one really paid attention to. At the same time, José realized that he would not be able to reunite such a disjointed team again and decided to leave. The scandalous parting and the unsuccessful third season somewhat smeared the overall picture of Mourinho's work at Real Madrid, but it is still worth recognizing that the Portuguese's work at Santiago Bernabéu was more successful than a failure. Judge for yourself. In addition to winning the Spanish Cup and the brilliant company in La Liga, he consistently reached the semi-finals of the Champions League every year. Real Madrid did not have such stability in the main European Cup since the time of Del Bosque. Mourinho's not-so-obvious but important decision was to invite Zidane to a rather original position, advisor to the first team. At that time, the appointment seemed insignificant, but considering the specifics of his work, Zinedine was in constant contact with the players, who would later become the backbone of his highly successful team. And let's not forget that it was Zizou who played a significant role in Benzema's transfer and his successful adaptation in Madrid. Despite the decent results, José traditionally left scorched earth after himself, which, however, played into the hands of his successor, Carlo Ancelotti. The calm, polite, and non-conflict Italian diffused the situation in the team, and this immediately brought results. In the 13-14 Champions League draw, the Blancos finally managed to reach the final, where they dramatically beat Atletico and became the first team in history with 10 big-eared trophies. The coveted La Decima was considered an epical achievement, but Perez remained a maximalist, so he decided to part with Carlo after he lost the championship race in Spain for the second time in a row. Under the guidance of Ancelotti, Real Madrid played attractive football, but for Florentino, the main argument was now exclusively trophies. The departure of the Italian began to look even stranger when the name of his successor became known. Rafael Benitez had long since lost his former popularity but was still famous for his ability to get results in cup tournaments, which was most important for the president of the Royal Club. After all, he dreamed of constant victories in the Champions League. On the other hand, the Spanish coach did not have the necessary charisma, the fans did not really like him, and what was key, Real Madrid played poorly in big matches under his leadership. Perez realized that Benitez could not take control of the situation, and at the very beginning of 2016, he made a risky castling. The new coach of the Blancos was Zinedine Zidane, who had almost no coaching experience. But if in this aspect he noticeably conceded to Rafael, then in terms of authority, he significantly surpassed him. Zidane's status significantly helped him win the favor of the collective, after which he made several successful staffing decisions, for example, inviting fitness coach Antonio Pintus from Lyon. In the 15-16 Champions League draw, Real Madrid did not look like an unconditional favorite, but until the semi-finals, they did not get the most difficult opponents. It was obvious to everyone that Roma and Wolfsburg were noticeably inferior to the Madrid players in level, but even to win against the German team, the Blancos had to show heroism, making a comeback after a 2-goal defeat. The semi-final duel with Manchester City also turned out to be not very convincing, the Whites went further thanks to the only goal in 2 matches. Actually, Zidane's Wards won the final with Atletico with even greater difficulty, winning the trophy only in a penalty shootout. Real Madrid's triumph could not be called accidental, but an element of luck was still present in their victory. The Madrid team was definitely not the most stable among the top European clubs and reached the long-awaited trophy just at the moment when no one expected it. Newcomers are lucky, this is how many explain Zinedine's loud success, but in the new 16-17 season, the Frenchman proved that he has impressive coaching talent. First of all, it is worth noting the fantastic pace of the Blancos in La Liga. They climbed to the first place already after the 3rd round and did not leave it until the end of the draw. Something similar was observed in the Champions League, where Real Madrid also could not be stopped. The closest to this was Bayern when in the quarterfinals they managed to translate the match into extra time, but in overtime, the Whites simply removed the wheel, unexpectedly scoring 3 unanswered goals. Then there was already a traditional meeting with Atletico, this time in the semi-finals, which turned into a real benefit for Cristiano. In the first match at Santiago Bernabéu, Ronaldo made a hat-trick, thereby turning the return match into a formality. The minimal victory of the mattress makers changed nothing. Well, after the final of the tournament, in which the Madrid players defeated Juventus with a score of 4-1, many began to talk about Zidane's coaching genius. It was in that match that Zinedine made a famous speech in the locker room during the break, which went around the world. He also showed courage and tactical flexibility, changing the arrangement of his team right in the course of the most important game of the season. As a result, Zidane's Real Madrid became the first team in the history of the Champions League to win the tournament twice in a row, but as it turned out in the 17-18 campaign, this was far from the limit. In the second half of that season, the Frenchman realized that his team would definitely not be able to compete for victory in La Liga, so he very correctly set priorities, focusing on the main European Cup. If in previous draws Real Madrid was sometimes accompanied by luck, then that year the Madrid players faced a real test at every stage. Already in the 1-8 finals, they got PSG, which was considered the favorite, but was very confidently defeated. In 2 matches, the Whites scored 5 times, conceding only twice. Then the Blancos defeated Juventus away, and Cristiano scored one of the most famous and beautiful goals in his career. But at the same time, at Santiago Bernabéu, Real Madrid played one of the worst matches of the season. The old lady played back a 3-goal lag, but in the last minutes, there was a penalty in the goal of the Turin team and the famous conflict of referee Michael Oliver and Gianluigi Buffon, after which Ronaldo with a shot from the point sent his team to the semi-final. To play again in the decisive meeting, Real Madrid needed to cope with another grand. Bayern looked very powerful, but the Blancos, thanks to an away victory, still overcame the incredibly difficult German barrier and went to the 3rd final in a row. Traditionally, the Whites got a status opponent, Jurgen Klopp's Liverpool, but Zidane's Wards coped with a new difficult task. The final match was remembered for the injury of Mohamed Salah, the amazing mistakes of Loris Karius, and the gorgeous goal of Gareth Bale. But most importantly, there was the fact of victory itself. The Madrid players were creating history. 3 consecutive successes in the Champions League over 2.5 years became not only an epical achievement but also made Zinedine Zidane the best coach in the annals of the Blancos. Leaving Real Madrid after the victorious final in Kiev, in March 2019, he returned to Santiago Bernabéu to add another gold La Liga to his impressive list of coaching achievements, and before the start of the current season, he handed over the coaching post to Carlo Ancelotti. You can talk as much as you like about the shortcomings or mistakes of Perez, and there are really quite a few of them, but it would be strange to deny that it was from the moment of his first entry into the office of the president that a new successful period in the history of the Royal Club began. Remembering the glorious times when the Whites dominated Europe thanks to a star-studded squad in the middle of the last century, Florentino decided to assemble his own Galácticos. If judged solely by names, then no team in the entire history of the game has had such a concentration of football stars. In his pursuit of the ideal and greatness, Perez repeatedly made controversial and inconsistent staffing decisions, but at least from a financial point of view, during his first term, he put Real Madrid on its feet. As practice shows, debts amounting to several €100 million often led clubs to bankruptcy, but Florentino, being an effective businessman, quickly solved this problem. Moreover, in addition to turning a profit, Perez managed to constantly spend fabulous money on the acquisition of top performers, but this did not affect the well-being of the Blancos. When in 2009 Florentino became the main man at the Royal Club for the second time, he continued his pursuit of greatness, inviting not only star footballers but also famous coaches. In general, Perez's approach looked somewhat crude and straightforward. He, as before, simply took and bought Ballon d'Or winners. But sooner or later, such a strategy was bound to justify itself. In 2001, Florentino bought Zidane simply because the Frenchman was one of the best players on the planet. The president could not even imagine how important a role the Frenchman would play and how closely he would be associated with the club. But that's what happens. If you persistently repeat the same actions, then the likelihood of achieving the result inevitably increases. If you compare the two periods of Perez's presidency of the Whites, then the second, undoubtedly, turned out to be much more productive. We must call a spade. Over the past 10 years, there has been no team more successful in the Champions League than Real Madrid. This means that Florentino has achieved his goal. Although Real Madrid faced financial problems against the background of the coronavirus pandemic, the position of the Whites looks much better than that of their sworn enemies.